Christian parenting.
Before we start today's episode, I'm excited to tell you about the chance you have right now to keep Pardon the Mess going strong and encouraging you in your parenting journey. And that's by giving a donation to ChristianParenting.org. Pardon the Mess is a part of the Christian Parenting Podcast Network, which is reaching over 500,000 moms and dads with trusted biblical guidance every month. Besides producing podcasts like Pardon the Mess, Christian Parenting also develops books, workbooks, prayer journals, and other practical tools to help parents like you and me become the perfectly imperfect parents God created us to be. I would be so grateful if you would take time today to text CP Give to 474747 to make a generous donation. That's CP Give to 474747. And when you make a generous donation, you will be entered into a drawing to win the Perfectly Imperfect Parenting Bundle, full of great parenting resources like identity cards that I've written to encourage your kids, marked by prayer journal, and even a $100 Amazon gift card. And so I know you want to share this message of hope and freedom to more moms and dads out there, and we can all walk this perfectly imperfect parenting road together. So please generously give today by texting CP Give to 474747, or you can also give by visiting cpgive.org. This is Cynthia Yanoff, and you're listening to Pardon the Mess. Each week we have honest discussions about the ups and downs of parenting and the lessons God is teaching us along the way. It's real, it's fun, and it's biblical. Life is messy. Don't walk the parenting road alone. I'm so glad you're with us today on Pardon the Mess. We are going through a series of tough conversations to have with our kids. And this is week 2, and we are talking about the birds and the bees. And this may not be a tough conversation in your house, but it is in mine. And so Mary Flo Ridley and Megan Michelson are with me. They have birds-bees.com. It's a whole curriculum on how to speak this into your kids. And they do it from a biblical perspective, and it's awesome. And yes, a lot of what we're talking about today is starting with our youngest of kids, and I think that's so important. But we also talk a little bit later in the conversation about what happens if you kind of miss the boat early on and your kids are older. So there's something for everyone, and I think there's a real discussion that's critical on why we do this for the safety of our kids, but the importance of making the narrative one that comes from God's Word. So I'm thrilled to have with us Mary Flo Ridley and Megan Michelson. Mary Flo and Megan, welcome to Pardon the Mess. How are you?
We're good.
We're good. Thank you so much for having us.
We're delighted to be here.
Well, thank you for being here. I got to hear you, Mary Flo, years and years and years ago when my daughter was young. And I don't want this to be an indictment on you, Mary Flo, because everyone that listens to this podcast knows I absolutely cannot speak into the topic of sex with my kids. Like, I'm terrible at it. I'm terrible about using the right words for anatomy. There's all kinds of problems. I probably need therapy. My kids probably need therapy. Let's put it that way. But I did hear you when my oldest was little, and I heard you speaking into this, and it was so good and profound and yet simple. And now Megan's with you, and I'm so excited to do this. So I just want everyone, as we're talking through tough conversations, I want us to be able to speak into this. And it may not be a tough conversation for a lot of families, but in my house, talking about the birds and the bees is. So kick us off, you two, either one of you, both of you, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you are in life, your connection to each other, and then we'll go from there.
Well, I'll start out. This is Mary Flo, and I'm so glad that we met a long time ago, Cynthia. I have been doing this a long time, about 30 years. Really, I started on this journey because I came from a family where the word sex was never said. A loving, wonderful, responsible family. But I was curious when my children were asking, Mommy, how is that baby getting out of there? Can I answer that? Is that okay? What will I say? And so I just started a journey of trying to figure out how I was going to approach this topic differently than my parents did. And initially I thought, I'm going to, of course, do this when they're teenagers. And then I backed it up and backed it up and backed it up, because really their curious questions come when they're 5 or 4. They come when that second child is on the way. And but just to tell you a little bit about my family, my husband Dave and I have been married 40 years. We live in Dallas, Texas, but today I'm here from Charlotte, North Carolina, where I'm babysitting 3 of my 8 grandchildren. So if you hear something break in the background, hopefully
That's
Pops
awesome.
can handle it. So yeah.
Awesome.
And I am Megan Michelson. I joined Mary Flo with Birds and Bees 5-ish years ago. So I heard Mary Flo's program live over 10 years ago. I was a middle school teacher before I had kids. And so I was teaching middle school, and I went to one of the parent programs to sign parents in. And I sat and stayed and listened to the program. And I was just left completely blown away of just how, and, hearing all this, not through a parent lens, because I didn't have kids of my own yet, but just through a middle school teacher lens of, wow, this could be so impactful for middle school students. And then bigger picture, wow, this could be so impactful for marriages and just our culture in general. If we could talk to our kids about sex in a completely different way, what an impact that could make for generations to come. So it really, looking back, it was just the beginning of the Lord putting this message on my heart. My husband Blake and I have been married for almost 12 years. We also live in Dallas, and we have 3 little kids. So we are in the trenches of practice what you preach mode. My oldest is 7.5, 5.5, 2.5.
Awesome. We're going to speak into talking birds and the bees with our kids. And I love kind of the formula you have set out. You have different steps, and I think it's so good. And I'd like to give everyone some free advice before we start. This is how you know you've done it wrong. When your daughter is maybe too old to be asking this question, but it's with a friend who's pregnant, and your daughter says to friend in the car, "Oh gosh, you're having a baby. Huh. I wonder if I could be pregnant and having a baby." To which my friend said, "You need to go home and chat with your mom." And that's when I realized, these questions are going to surface and must be dealt with, whether or not I want to ignore it or not. And so I love how you guys speak into starting first with creating a family message, like a unified sentence on what is our message around this topic. And so can you tell us like what that looks like, what maybe yours is, and why that's important as a starting point?
Well, it really is kind of the cornerstone of the birds and the bees sort of strategy, and the cornerstone of our course is that you really have to decide what is the main thing you want your children to know about sex if they're growing up in your family. And we know that's going to vary from family to family. Megan and I are both Christians, so the message that we are bringing to our family is based on God's biblical view of sex. But we also teach places where that's not really the main thing. So we are still there for parents who don't have the same worldview that we do, to teach them, well, you can still teach them, but yours is going to involve maybe more science and more, you'll have other things that you want to set your priorities on. But most of the time we are speaking to like-minded parents. But so our message for our family was that sex is a gift from God intended for marriage. So we wanted our conversations to center around the beauty of God's design and the boundaries he set up to protect that beauty.
Yeah. Okay. And so we get this message, kind of the narrative of what we're going to focus our discussions around. And then we wait till they're 14 and they ask a question. Then we start talking about, is that the next step, or am I incorrect somewhere? What happens next?
You're missing a few steps in there. So what our hope by having the message be our first step of our strategy is that we want parents to have an offensive plan. So often, and you spoke about this a little bit earlier, Cynthia, so often when it comes to talking to your kids about sex, it's just so much fear, right? It's just a panic, fear, dread, avoid. And so our nature is almost to have a defensive strategy when it comes to this topic. Okay, well, this is what I'm not going to say. These are the words we're not going to use. This is who you're not going to date. I mean, our hope with Birds and Bees is that we can help switch that around and really encourage and empower parents to have an offensive plan. Okay, what do I want them to know? What words am I comfortable using? What kind of ideas do I want to put in their head? And kind of spin it around like, what do I want them to know? And then we give you practical ways to step forward to share those ideas with our kids. So what this looks like is multiple conversations from just 3 to 18. What we don't want, and kind of our big picture movement here is to get rid of the idea of the talk. And you can't see me on a podcast, but I'm doing quotation marks. Yes. Because the talk is like that big bad bombshell, painfully awkward conversation at an awkward age, where parents just say everything, and it's horrible, and everyone runs away thinking, oh gosh, what was that? And it's never spoken of again. right?
Yeah.
What we want to do is get rid of that and replace it with smaller conversations that are age appropriate and that build on one another.
That's so good. That's so good. And so then what would be the first step in that? And let's just assume we're talking about younger kids, because in a perfect world, we would start this younger. Now, anyone listening who missed the boat, like take it from me, it's going to all be okay, or we hope it is. But let's just assume we're dealing with some of the younger kids. And I think maybe the second step I read that you guys talk a lot about is using the anatomical vocabulary.
Exactly. Like when they are learning their body parts, elbow, knuckle, freckle, all of those things are kind of funny words, but the sooner that they can learn the words that identify male or female, then the better that is. It's for a multiple level of reasons. For many reasons, they need to know those. Primarily, if you are a sort of a fear-based person, this is for their protection. Because if they know the anatomically correct words, then psychologists will tell you that this is a critical step in preventing child abuse or ongoing child abuse, if children can identify their body parts. But in a less fearful way, we just want to be respectful. We want, as the parents, to come across as a loving authority. And when we're using those wingy-wangy words, it doesn't sound very authoritative. And also, just even in a Christian point of view, we want to be as honoring as we can be to God's creation, and what he wasn't embarrassed to make, we shouldn't be embarrassed to talk about. So we want them to know that God said it was good, and that it's a good part of their body, and the silliness and the shame don't need to be a part of it. So using the words that doctors use with what we call your pediatric voice, instead of, sometimes we can't get our voice to say it, so you just think you're the pediatrician. You just use use that voice in your brain if you can find it. So those
awesome.
are some of the reasons.
Good visual. I'll try not to whisper it anymore. Okay, Megan, were you going to add something in there?
Yeah, I think, so often, and I think it's also like in a sub-parenting generation, there's been like a little bit of a shift where I think when Mary Flo first started this, that was a little culturally shocking in a way, especially in a Christian culture. I feel like so often there's like pushback of like penis. Ooh, I can't say that word. Or vagina. If my mother hears me say that word, she's going to fall over. But I feel like that has shifted a little bit where now parents, like current parents of young kids, that's not as unusual using those words, or for at least to have the idea of I should be. Yeah. And we often refer to it as using your P's and B's to refer to your penis, vagina vocabulary. It's one of those things that it sounds so scary for a lot of people. Now, anyone who has like a medical background, doctor, nurse, or whatever, they say words like it's, no big deal. But for a lot of people, it is a stumbling block, and it's hard to spit out those words. Or if you do, you kind of get that splotchy chest feeling, or, you kind of get that panicking. But like Mary Flo said, I think it's important for so many of these conversations to have mind over matter. It's not about us, it's about them. It's not about us, it's about them. How can I protect them? How can I empower them? And I can get over my discomfort and say some of these words.
Okay. And then, so do we start after that point? Do we start waiting for them to ask questions? Like, when they see someone that's pregnant, that seems to show up, or when you're pregnant with your second child, or are there next affirmative steps we take? And I think, Mary Flo, this is where I remember you talking so wisely into taking very ordinary things like seeds and speaking that into our kids. How does that work? Do we wait? Do we go ahead? And what's kind of that first entry point?
Usually the first question that children do ask is, so how is that baby getting out of that mommy? Maybe it's you, maybe it's a friend or their teacher. How will that baby get out of there? Their developmental curiosity is usually about birth first and then conception. Your question was, do we take the initiative or do we wait for them to ask? It kind of depends on what kind of child you have. But in either case, if you have a question asker or one that doesn't ask, in either case, you're in charge. That's what we want parents to know, is you're overseeing the development of this topic in your family, not the other way around. So you do follow their curiosity when they ask a lot of questions, but if they don't ask, we like to share a phrase, and it is, sweetheart, have you ever wondered, like, if you feel like this would be a great time to talk about birth, because we're about to go to a gender reveal party for our cousin or, something like that. And so I'd like for them to know that. So if you think it's a good time, you can just say, you can look at a baby book and say, have you ever wondered exactly how you got out of here? You shouldn't wait to walk through every step. It also should come naturally. Like if you're cutting an apple and you want to talk about seeds, then take that step. Or, you don't have to do the steps that we give parents just in order. You don't have to wait for a certain age. You can just see how it all develops.
And so, Mary Flo, I'm going to ask you just a follow-up to that. If you're cutting an apple and you have your sweet grandchild there, not that you're necessarily having these discussions, their parents probably are, but in theory, what's that step? How do we take this apple and actually do something informative to tell them about the reproduction process?
It's just introducing the idea of seeds and eggs and how they're the foundation for new life. It's just a very simple step. It's just pointing out, kind of seeds and eggs. We have lots of conversations and sample conversations about birth, about seeds, about conception in our course. But basically it evolves as they get a little bit older. And it's just being observant about nature. It's just being observant. Instead of going straight to the trash can, you just talk about it for just a little bit. It's not a lecture. It's not a diagram. It's not a science project. It's just, isn't this amazing? What are these little things in here? I think they're called seeds. And they would actually make another apple if it was planted in the right place, had the right soil and water and all that. But we do go through all that. And it does take on a natural curiosity. You just develop that curiosity. And if you're curious about things, then they'll be curious.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And so Megan, tell us what about when it gets to the point where we probably need to talk more nuts and bolts with our kids? What does that look like? What's your best advice on doing that well?
So often, again, like really diving into like conception conversations, you hear phrases around of like 8's too late or 9's still fine, or I don't know if you've heard this before, but
yeah,
we don't like to give it a hard age just because every 8-year-old's different, every 9-year-old's different, every family dynamic is different. But I think what's important to remember is regardless of the actual age number, it's important to do these conversations pre-puberty. Because, and even though that's kind of sounds like, is that too soon? Is that, am I going to damage my child by telling them stuff when they're too young? But what we're doing is if we talk to our young kids before they are hormonally charged, they take in this information at face value. And I think it's important for parents to remember that of like, we are adults, we are sensual beings, we're hormonally charged. We say these phrases and like whoosh, a ton of baggage comes up, or good things, bad things, but good ideas, bad ideas. All this stuff comes to our brains when we're explaining this because we are hormonal sensual beings. Our young kids pre-puberty don't have all of that going around in their brains. That is one of the reasons it's important to talk to them early or sooner than you think. Because once they are hormonally charged and once they are in puberty and everything is shifted, it's a much more awkward conversation and much more uncomfortable for both of you.
Hey guys, I'm going to jump in here for just a minute. I wanted to tell you about an email I received recently from a mom saying she had run across ChristianParenting.org and had been listening to Pardon the Mess and how she felt like it was giving her a community of believers that were raising their kids together. I laughed because she said that I was the friend she never knew she needed. And I hope that encourages you because it encourages me. I feel the same way. Y'all are the friends I need that maybe I never knew I needed. And so as we're doing this together, I just need your help to continue allowing us to make resources like this podcast, like the prayer journals, like the note cards we do, all the different things we do come from a place of being 100% donor-funded ministry, and we're supported by people like you. And so would you take time and make a donation by texting CP Give to 474747. Again, that's CP Give to 474747, or you can also give by going to cpgive.org. But we are 100% donor-funded ministry, and we rely on listeners like you to support the future creation of parenting resources. So if you've been impacted by Pardon the Mess, if you're doing this parenting walk with us, I would love for you to prayerfully consider how you could contribute to what we do. It's CP Give to 474747. I also want to tell you about one of our favorite places, Sky Ranch. Now more than ever, our kids need to unplug, be outside, make lasting friendships, and be exposed to the truth of God's Word. And so Sky Ranch helps busy parents inspire growth and foster relationships for their kids by providing fun and engaging Christian summer camp experiences. Your child will have an incredible week of zip lines, water rides, Bible study, parties, and community, and you can relax knowing it's biblically sound, it's intentional curriculum, and it's woven into every experience by relevant, high-qualified, mentor-minded counselors. It's crazy fun with a powerful purpose. So sign your child up today for the best week of their summer at skyranch.org. Again, that's skyranch.org. And just for Christian parenting fans, you get $200 off a Sky Ranch overnight camp summer of 2021 in Van, Texas. And that's for grades 1 through 9. So the code for that is Sky Parent. But check it all out at skyranch.org. We're going to put this all and link it in podcast notes, but everyone, birds-bees.com. Again, it's birds-bees.com is where you can find this course you can take and all their resources and kind of catch up with them. And so it's an amazing, amazing program y'all have, and it's so helpful. Okay, so I'm going to put you on the spot for a minute, Mary Flo, and let's just say this up front. Everybody does it differently. There's no right words. There's no right way. We all have different kids. But let's just say, just because I think this was maybe one of the most pivotal, helpful things that I heard from you, is you just speaking into it. Like if my child walked in today, your child walked in today, little child, and said, hey, how did that baby get in her stomach? The way that you speak into that is, I think, what inspired me and gave me confidence to walk out to say, I can do this too. Could you just give us a little bit of that? Give people a feel for how you speak into it. And that'll also point people back to listening to your course, because there's so much both of you have to offer.
Well, we do ask for parents. We do say, if you haven't had any idea of what you were going to say, you don't have your message, you haven't talked about seeds and eggs, you haven't built up to this conversation, you might want to say, well, how do you think? And have just kind of a vague conversation at that very moment. Well, let's talk about that some more. And then start building towards that, because it is helpful to have some vocabulary, to have, to anticipate that conversation with the other things to build towards that. But regardless of where you are in the process of talking to your kids, I think you want to remember, let's just keep this simple. Let's keep it to the basic biology and my message. That's where you're going to pull your vocabulary. So you can talk about, sweetheart, this is so good. Usually I say, sweetheart, I'm so glad you asked, because that is a great pause line. You can refresh your brain and then move forward. And you just want to let them know that this is by God's design, and you want to use the right words. Of maybe you would not use man and woman, maybe you would use husband and wife. So you want to know that this is between a husband and a wife. And that's where all these other conversations come in handy, because honestly, this is building up to this conversation. So I'm not saying that you can't answer it, but what I want to say, because I want to answer your question, but I also want to say that this won't be as meaningful for your children if they don't know what you're talking about when you say the seed from daddy and the egg from mommy meet together in a special way. That can be a very simple. You don't even have to go anatomically to the penis and vagina part. You can just say, well, God put a seed in daddy and an egg in mommy. And when they meet together in a special way, those two things work together to make the baby. So you can just make a sort of a baseline, and then build on the conversation from there. But once again, it's a building of lots of little conversations, more than it is, okay, check that off, I did that. Or because chances are, if they're really young, they'll come back later and say, no, you never told me that. Like, it's not this big event in their life. They asked you once, and you might think, oh, but I told you. But I already did that. I don't have to do it again, do I? And actually, you do. So it's a lot of circling back. It's a lot of, you remember when we talked about that? Well, now that you're bigger, I want you to know a little more. And so you keep going back to them with the right vocabulary, with the words from your message, with the basic biology, so that they know that you're the person to come to, and you're the person who knows all about this.
So good. So good. When we're speaking into this from a Christian perspective, we're all, the three of us are all Christians, and this is a Christian podcast. And I can speak into that a little bit. How do we do this well as Christians speaking into this with our kids?
I think so much of what motivates me with this topic is, I guess, territorial in a way, or that sounds so aggressive, but I guess that's what fires me up about this. It's like the world has such a hold on this topic, and the culture is screaming and sending loud messages to all of us as adults and children about sex and what it's supposed to be like. And those are very clear, strong messages. And so I get fired up, I guess, because I'm like, where are the Christians? This is God's design. He made this. And if we are uncomfortable as parents and just awkward and like, oh, I don't know if I can say those words, it's like, well, then we need to stand up and fight for our kids and share the message that we believe in. Because if we're silent about this topic because we're uncomfortable or it's awkward or like, oh, I'm so embarrassed, like that is just waving a white flag and saying, your mommy is too uncomfortable to talk to you about this. And so just Google it. Just ask a friend. Just watch that movie. And so to me, it's like, as Christians, we got to get, what's that verse in 2 Timothy? Do not be timid. For God did not give us a spirit of timidity, but of power, love, and discipline. And this can be a scary topic, and that is normal to be scared. So don't think, oh, I can't do it because I'm so scared. It is scary. So feel comforted by, this is normal. This is uncomfortable. This is not something we are naturally trained to do. Do not be overwhelmed by that timidity. For God did not give us a spirit of timidity, but of power, love, and discipline. And this is his message, and this is his design. And so we should be speaking up. As Christians, we should have a loud message. We should be explaining this to our kids. And instead, I think it's frustrating because, and I get it. I mean, I'm in the trenches with these little kids looking ahead of how are we going to navigate this world and these conversations. But I think as parents, our kids deserve more than just one awkward talk. And so I think that is kind of the hope and the motivation behind this, is that we can encourage parents. Let's empower parents, Christian parents. Let's do this together. Our kids deserve better, because the world is out there screaming and shouting and putting out very clear messages that are actually degrading and confusing and, not necessarily in line with what God's design is. So if we as Christian parents in particular decide to say nothing, I mean, that essentially is just kind of giving up.
Yeah.
And that's not what we're called to do.
Yeah. I mean, they're going to get the narrative somewhere. So let's get the narrative coming from our house and from Scripture, and from like what y'all are talking about, or what our family statement is around this. And so I heard you, Mary Flo, speak somewhere where you talked about how going back to just the Bible is full of things that speak into this topic. And I think I heard you mention even like going back to Genesis, and where they were in the garden, Adam and Eve were naked and unashamed, and then the serpent came. Can you just speak into a little bit, maybe just give someone that's listening, it's like, where do I start biblically with this? Give an idea of just how to start there and what to be looking at scripturally when you're addressing this and maybe coming up with that narrative in your home.
Well, actually, it's all right there in Genesis, but so many other places too. But it's fun to think of our steps in line with Genesis, because he made us in his image. And then he said, be fruitful and multiply. He said, leave your parents and cleave to your wife. So we can talk about the purpose of sex is really for fruitfulness and oneness, both of those things. And sometimes we think, oh, it's just about making babies, but it's not. It's fruitfulness and oneness. And then also in Genesis, you got those seeds and eggs, and the whole design is right there. So foundationally, he did not start his word by hiding sex or making it shameful. Like in the garden, this is good. This is one of the things that we got to take from the Bible. Yes, in a skewed way now that we're in the fallen world, but the original design, he didn't just say was good. He said it was very good. So we want to honor him in that. And we can either honor him or degrade what he created. By the way, we talk about this to our children, and I think it should be honoring to him. But they're all the stories. Like, why do you think Noah had to take 2 animals? Why? It would have saved him a lot of space if he just, took one giraffe. But why did he have to have a male and a female giraffe? Or, talking about, all of the messes that are made in the families of the, really of our ancestors and and our, I don't want to say founding fathers, our biblical,
Yeah.
In the Old Testament, all of the mistakes that were made, all of the choices that were made, all the wives that Solomon had, was that a good idea? No. So there are just so many stories of failure, and yet the design remained. So this was the beauty of his design is what we want, I think, as Christians, for our children to grow up with. I think when we were growing up, that it was bad and you had to say no and it was wrong and there was something shameful about it. And then, oops, I guess maybe it's not. There was just a lot of confusion rather than saying, no, this is totally wonderful. But the beauty of it is that it's within covenant marriage. That's where it's beautiful. Outside of it, it can be destructive, it can be harmful, and it can be confusing. So that's why it's reserved for that union.
Yeah, I love that. And I even think of David and how obviously he had the affair with Bathsheba and killed Uriah, and yet he's still a man after God's own heart, and how the Bible even speaks into those places where we miss it, where we get it wrong, and how the redemption that God gives. And I think that's such an important message for our kids as well. God loves us. He's for us. And even in those hard places, he can use us, and he does. And so I love that. I love going back and looking at it just biblically, because I think if you look at through that perspective, look through the eyes of the Bible, we're looking for that. You'll see so many places that are instructive and teaching it to our kids. And so as we wrap up, here's my other question. If your kids are older and older than maybe even the curriculum that you guys teach, and you feel like, oh man, I missed it. Now all I can do is have the one talk and call it done, which we know is not right. But what's your advice in that? What are your thoughts on those that may be listening and saying, oh, I wish I would have done this earlier?
I think something we say a lot is later is better than never. And so, is it great if you can start when they're 3 years old asking about babies? Yes. But if you are looking at a 13, 14, 16-year-old, you can still start there. And I think it's tempting to feel like you have to catch up and think, okay, we're going to do this one big weekend. I'm going to say every single thing I want them to know and cover steps 1 through 6 from the course and, all that stuff. What we encourage parents to do, especially if they feel like they're catching up, is to give yourself kind of a long leash of like 6 months, let's say, and then to be a bit more open and direct with your child. And like, sweetheart, there's so many things that I wish I would have told you about sooner, and just kind of dropped the ball. And I didn't give you all the information I wanted to, but it's not too late. And it might be uncomfortable for you and it might be uncomfortable for me, but it is so important to me that you hear this information from me, that over these next 6 months, we're going to cover a lot. And every Tuesday on the way to dance, I'm going to talk to you, and you can sit next to me and you don't have to look at me. You can look out the window, but we're going to cover these things over the next 6 months. So to kind of, if you have questions, ask me, I can ask questions, whatever, but kind of like give yourself a time frame that's not tonight. We are going to cover everything, but kind of, and when they're older like that, I think it's okay to be more direct. Like, listen, this is what we're going to talk about, and take the blame. Like, I should have told you sooner, but I didn't. I got uncomfortable, but we're going to do this, and it might be awkward for you, and you might hate it, but you know what? I love you more than that, so we're going to just power through. We can do this.
Yeah. That's so good. I have a really good friend that when her daughter was in junior high, I remember they lived kind of far away, and they'd always come to our house. And the drive to my house apparently was always the assigned time to kind of talk through some of those things. And one day my friend, she is hilarious. I said, how are y'all doing? And our daughters had gone off to play, and she's like, good. We talked about oral sex on the way over here. And I was like, oh gosh, I think I'd rather roll my car off the tollway than discussion on oral sex on the way over to my house. And so anyway, but as you're saying that, I'm thinking like she was so smart in that it was a longer drive, and they just kind of talked through it all. And her daughter was completely comfortable with it because that's all she knew, because her mom had always been speaking into those topics. And so that's what I hope encourages everyone, is some of these conversations can be hard, but they're important. And I love what you said, Megan, about this. They deserve it. And let's be territorial about God's design for sex in our marriages, because it matters. It's important. And biblically, we've got to do it well.
The one thing I'd just like to throw out there is that I think, especially in Christian circles, parents of young children are afraid they're going to break their innocence. They're going to destroy their innocence. And they don't want to have these conversations because of that. And so they think, oh, but they're so innocent. But what I want them to realize is that we should never equate innocence with ignorance. Innocence is more of a condition of the heart. You can know a lot about something, but you are still innocent about it because in your heart, you understand the context of it. I think we're actually protecting their innocence and not leaving them wide open to what they would hear in the wider world. And so if we can turn that around for parents of young children and they can understand, oh, actually, if my child is ignorant, then they are more vulnerable than if I instruct them biblically and biologically, then they will actually be more protected. So that's what I want some of those parents who are thinking, oh, but they're so innocent. Actually, they're vulnerable unless you teach them.
And on the flip side, that was very grounded and well-reasoned. I love that, Mary Flo. On the other side of it from Cynthia, this is not well-reasoned and grounded. They will one day in high school, people, if you don't have a high schooler, they will come and tell you, you are the worst when it comes to talking about this. I know nothing. And they tease you relentlessly about being uncomfortable with topics. So you might as well just get comfortable now. I know firsthand. So
that's so funny.
Okay. So on that note, Megan, tell everybody one more time how to find you, your course, and also on social.
Okay. So our website is birds-bees.com. Our online course takes just under 80 minutes to watch. And so you can find it online, sit with your spouse and be empowered. And then you can follow us on Instagram, birds_bees, and we share lots of helpful information. So Instagram and our website are the best places to find us.
Oh, y'all are amazing. Thanks for doing this. And Mary Flo, thanks for all those years ago, taking time and investing in young parents. And I'm going to trust that so many got it right, even though this student failed a little bit. But thank you guys, both of you, for doing this and for joining us today.
Thank you, Cynthia, for having us.
A huge thank you to Megan Michelson and Mary Flo Ridley for coming today and talking about this hard conversation with us. We'll have a few more in this series, but I'm grateful that you were with us. Also, please take a minute and pray about a donation to CP Give. Again, that's texting 474747 to CP Give. You will help us continue to create resources for parents and also this podcast. And so if you've been impacted by Pardon the Mess, by all the things we do through Christian parenting, this would be a huge blessing for us. You can go to cpgive.org or again, text CPGive to 474747. We know your days are busy, so as always, thank you for joining us as we pardon the mess.